Right, by special request of Crims or Jack Birdseye, I'm making this sort of guide, I guess, into scripting. It's pretty simple stuff. It's just a boss blip. Now, the key fundamentals of that is if a job exists, what you want the script to do with the job, and also what you want the job to be able to do in the blip. I'm on the dev server, and what I'm going to do is have a look at a script I've already made for the nightclub, which is practically the same blip. So what you'll see here is the two most important scripts, the client side and the server side. So the client side is what the character will see and do, and then the menus would also be in the client side, and the server side will handle everything else. So the stuff that the client you won't see. So we'll start with the client. So there's three things to look for when you're trying to make practically any script. Actually, no, we'll call it four. We've got threads. These things are things that constantly run. You can argue with fors. You can create arguments. So this is a pretty, not complicated one, but it's not one you really need to understand right now. Basically, it's saying if something is happening, then do all of these things. So that's threads. If you've ever read a book, you know to read left to right, up to down. You don't read down to up. So it's pretty simple. When you go through all of these, you can see your foundations are here. These are the important bits. And then the further you work yourself down, it might look like a load of code, but it all makes sense if you just read it. It's all in plain English as well, luckily. Some scripts aren't. This one is. So what you have here is the second thing out of four is a function. So client-side functions are very popular because what you'll see is this is the thing that your script will talk to. You're basically telling it to do something. That's a function. You've got all the complicated bits here, but what you'll see right there, there's a function. I call these symbols because once you see that, you know that this is doing something important. For example, this is actually a menu. As you see, it's got elements. So in this menu, what it's going to show you, client side, is an unselectable item, something I can't click on, is the Galaxy menu, which is obviously the title. And then you have, once again, plain English, go back. So that's the go back icon. And then your cloakroom, simple as. So in this boss blip, all you see is the option to go back and the cloakroom. This is what's going to show on the client side, but this is what it actually means. Because you have the title and then the value. Well, the value is much more important because if this doesn't go anywhere, when you click this, it won't work. Once again, left to right, up to down. So because I've implemented a cloakroom in the menu, I need it to go somewhere. So the value being cloakroom, if the value is the cloakroom, what's it going to do? Well, if I just keep reading, it's going to open a function called the changing room menu. And if I go to that function, the thing with Notepad++ as well is it highlights the next thing that is the same. So that's also a really good feature. I highly recommend Notepad++ because it's basically Visual Studio without all the lag and intensity, especially on a VPS, which I'm using now. So what the cloakroom will do is it'll create another function. All that's doing is breaking out of this, because once it hits that end here in this chunk of the script, it won't carry on. If I did that here, that means nothing, because it has to actually be in something, whether a function or a thread or whatever. If I've clicked cloakroom, it'll open the changing room menu. Well, what that does is number 3 of 4 basic parts of a client-side script. It will trigger a server callback. Now, this part is a bit harder to explain because we're using a new framework. This can be the norm, or if you just look at the script, if you're just editing one instead of making, which I would highly recommend, just look at what they're doing. If they're doing ESX dot, you do ESX dot. If they're not, you don't. So it's triggering the server callback of the property script. Now, what you need to make sure is you never change this. If you do, it won't work. What this is doing is making a phone call to our property script that we have, and it's getting the player dressing. Once again, plain English, you're reading left to right, up to down. It's getting what you're wearing and what you can wear. This chunk can be a bit unexplainable for some, because pretty much every clothing script I've ever seen in my life needs this, but there's no point explaining it because we're just replicating a script that's already been made for someone else. So in the job, you want to access the cloakroom. Well, what it's going to do is open context, which is another UI. Once again, go back. So if the element value that I've inserted all the way up here, one of the elements is to go back. Once again, as I said, the value is to go back. If you click that, it'll open the Groove Actions menu again. Well, now that I've selected it, let's look for something green. It's up here. So if you're watching this for the 5th time and you're like, how does that make any sense? It doesn't need to be in order. If you're a shit scripter, you're going to do it funky ways round, because functions it doesn't matter whether the function's above or below the script that's trying to call to it. It's about order, I guess. And if you're OCD like me, what it's doing is it's repeating on itself. So if you do click go back while you're in the cloakroom, the changing room menu, which you clicked up here, if you've clicked it and opened the change room menu, you're like, oh fuck, I messed up. Well, it's already brought you into this chunk. You're not even in this chunk anymore. So what it's going to do, oh, okay, I've got an option to go back. Let's do it. Once again, just reading all the way down. Every script goes downwards until you force it to go back up. That's the basics of it. So once again, this is sort of 3.5, I guess, of the 4 things, because it's just an event. All that event does is you get skin changer, which is the script that property uses to change your skin. So skin changer, it gets your skin, and the function of that, which is one of these little guys, but it's in this script this time. What it's doing is it's getting your skin. Cool. So then it's going to trigger another server callback in this to talk to property again and get your outfit. That's different from dressing, as you can see. So your outfit is your work clothes in the boss menu, but it will load all of your clothes, as you can see. So it will select the skin that you've clicked on, as you can see, because that's go back. So what else is it going to do? Okay, well, it's actually going to select your skin. It's going to get your skin, and then it's going to force it to save. If it can't do that bit, it won't. Code is very simple. If you tell it to do something, if it can't find it or won't do it, it will do one of 2 things. Hopefully, it will throw an error, because then you can go and fix it. The worst one is when it doesn't give you an error, and then you have to go digging around, what the fuck did I break? So that's the changing room menu done. Everything that you see is here. It won't be anywhere else. If you've got 10 billion lines of code, if you go and do something and you can identify which part of the script goes wrong, you've now narrowed it down to 30 lines of code, which is much easier than a few billion. Let's go back again. What do we want this menu to actually do? We're in the main menu. You've walked up to the blip, you've clicked E. Okay, boss menu. I want you to either go back, change the clothes, or go to boss actions. Now, as you can see, this is very different to this, because all these 2 are doing functions. That one, going back, is closing the whole menu for you, and this one is your changing room. So what this one is doing, once again, it's doing a function, but then right after that, it's triggering an event. And the event is in the society where all the main boss menus actually hide away. It'll do this for you. You don't need to code this into ESX Society. It's pretty smart like that. What it'll actually do for you is open another boss menu that handles your finances and all that lot. That's why it's called Society. So for this one, because we're in the Galaxy script, it's looking for the job. If this job doesn't exist, it won't open the boss menu. You'll know that, trust me, because it will give you an error. But if it can find the job, great. Because what it's going to do is close the menu for you, which is the boss menu, because as you can see, it's tabbed into this part. So what it'll do is close the menu you're in, and it'll open the Groove Actions menu, which is back up here. So you can't really escape it unless you click go back, which is what we want. We don't want the menu randomly closing on us the second we click something, in case we didn't mean to click on it. So this is effectively a constant. Before I mention thing number 4 that you'll see in a client script, what you need to really be careful of, which Notepad++ does help for, is seeing these. So what's tabbed in and what's tabbed out. So in a certain line of code, you might see something different. Okay, there's a There's a bracket there, there's a comma there. Why? Well, for certain things, for example, this one, you're triggering the event, which is great. But as you can see, the bracket actually ends here, not up here. Why? Well, because it's opening the boss menu, it has to do a series of things first before actually finishing closing the boss menu for the society. So what it has to do, and it's going to force it to do it. If it can't, it'll tell you. What it has to do is these two things. Brilliant. So that's with the brackets. And once again, you see it again right here. It has to do all of this before it actually ends on the bracket. End doesn't mean end if it's got a bracket. The bracket and end means end. So we've got Groove Actions menu. Okay, go back, Cloakroom, nice, boss menu, cool. And then you've got a load of functions. But the fourth thing that you're going to see in the client side is things that it's going to tell your ped or your character to do. In the client Lua, you're always going to see loads of funky things like this. And this is what confuses people. It's like, oh, what does all this mean? Well, aside from the actual code, you're telling it to do stuff. And that stuff might be quite important. It adds realism, it adds depth, whatever. So the extra touches I like to add, which scripters hate to do because it takes so long, is things like this. So our progress, it's exporting our progress, which is its own script. What our progress does is it has the little loading wheel. So everything you see that you do, you buy anything from a shop, you eat some food, you reload your gun. If there's a loading bar, an animation or something, it has to be coded in personally. So what you'll see is when I go to open the safe, it lasts for 2 seconds because these are in milliseconds. So it lasts for 2 seconds. Async is false, which means it doesn't freeze everything. And the label, well, the good thing about this is why it's one of my favorite loading things. One, it's not a bar because bars are ugly. And also our progress, it's a radial and it shows a little bit of text underneath. If you want it to, I could just remove that and it would just show a circle going around, which is great. But I've added a label opening safe. Once this is done, once again, reading up to down, it's going to play a sound for you. There's a full list of all the sounds on a website that I found. That took me hours to find it. But basically what it's going to do, it's going to make an open sound for elevator doors. You'll hear it in a minute. And yeah, it just sounds like you're opening a safe. It's the closest sound I could find. And what it's going to do next is trigger an event. Well, this is actually calling a different script. It's the inventory script this time. As you can see, we've got about 5 different scripts in one script. The most important one is this one, of course, but this you have to find, and this is why I have side-by-side view on, in another script, because it won't be in here. So if it's triggering an event, it's outside of this. What it's going to do to the client, which is you, is open an inventory, and the inventory is called Galaxy Safe. So if I were to go to look for that in our inventory script, I go in the client, because it's talking to the client, the plugins, I'll actually see house. Well, it's the closest thing, open house inventory. So I crack it open, and as you'll see, when I side-by-side this again, there you go. So this is in the inventory script. It's not even in this one, but it's calling it and it's finding it, which is great. You'll actually see, which took me ages to understand how it was happening. You're doing all this, right? Great. But if I were to just put the bracket there, it wouldn't work. Why? If that's called that and that's called that, why is it not just doing it for me? Well, because you need to give it more data. If there's a function after this, you need to feed it whatever it's asking for, otherwise it won't work. So it's going to do all this for you, but what you need to give it first is what's the property. This can be different depending on what script you work with. It might have loads of commas after it. It might just be one thing but mean different things. It's hard to explain. You have to look at it. And this is why scripting videos are so hard, is every person scripts differently, for one, and two, it might look completely different. What I'm working with might be nowhere near what you're working with. It might be exactly the same script. It might be different callbacks, it might be different locals. No one knows, which is why it's so hard. But to give you a brief overview, this is why I'm trying to oversimplify. Yes, this is oversimplifying. What you're doing is you're feeding it. So the information you need to give it is what is the property called, because that's the function. Well, what it's called is Galaxy Safe. Now, if you want this to be called anything different, you could just change this. And that is exactly what we're going to do, because I do not have enough time to explain why it doesn't have to be called that. That maybe for a later video if people ask for it. But yeah, what it's going to do is going to open the safe. It's going to wait 0.6 of a second, because once again, it's in milliseconds. and then it's going to clear the ped tasks. But as you can see, that is number 4, hello. It's a native. So in the client side, once again, as I said, this is everything showing on your screen, what you're seeing, what you're doing, whatever. If this is exporting another script to do stuff on your screen, which is show the radial progress, what also happened before that is it did a scenario, which is an animation. That's the native for an animation. So what it's going to do after all, it's going to start it, but it needs an end. So as you get down to here, because this is all instant, this is 2 seconds. So in 2 seconds, it's going to do that, and then it's going to do that, then that, but it has to wait 0.6 of a second before it clears the task that you gave it up here. And then it's just going to end because you've told it to do something else. So there's no point in it staying in here at all. So now that you've ended it, it's done. This function, whatever you've made this function do, is now closed, which, once again, Notepad helps with, because you can see what's closed and what isn't. You can also see separate types of closes, and you can minimize them, which really helps. If you think you've tabbed something in and you haven't, you can just look, okay, what have I actually tabbed in? So let's say I walk up to a blip. How is the blip there? And how is it not there for someone standing right next to me that hasn't got the same job? Well, if you go down far enough, because it's at the bottom for some reason, is number 1, threads. Well, as you know, threads are constant. So while this thread is true, which it always is, it's going to do this all the time. If I was to change this number here, it would flash really quickly. The reason for that is it's constantly looping. This is a loop. It's always happening. The more you see of these, the more lag you might be able to expect if it's not configured properly. So what you'll see is it's waiting 0 milliseconds, but you've still told it to wait a certain amount of time. It's going to try and figure that out. So you're actually slowing the script down just enough for it not to crash your game. Because without that, it's a bug fix. It's a very quick one and it works. If I were to tab that out, that's the tabbing out feature, is the 2 dashes. That won't recognize it because I've tabbed it out, and then it will just do it. If I were to run that now, it would crash my game because you need to put the bug fix, or the patch, I should say, back in. So after the patch, what's it doing? Here is the really important part. It's finding a job. This is the heart of job scripts. It's not actually doing anything to do with your job. It's talking to your job. So it's going to find all the data. This is Lua for not equal to. So if your job is not nil, which means you have got a job because it's not nil, and your job name is Galaxy. If your job is Galaxy, then it's going to do all of this. It's finding your coords from the player ped ID once again. So what I could also do, just to be extra cheeky, is very quickly show you what happened up there, which was make a local player ped. I'm going to make it equal to this. Yeah, I could actually just rip that clean out of there, do that, and then I don't need so many brackets because I could just make a player ped in there. I hope that makes sense to someone on what I just did there. But I ripped it out of there, put it up there, made it equal. I could make that equal anything I like as long as it's not in any of the other locals. If it is, it won't work. So I could call it Bob. Nice. But now that means fuck all to anything until you put it somewhere. Well, I've called a local called Bob. We know what Bob is, so why don't we just put it in there? Because now it's going to find Bob up here. I really don't know if I explained that very well. You can be honest. But yeah, just smoothly moving backwards. What it's doing is it's getting your coords and getting your entity zone. So the KV impairs config zones. That's another thing. Not out of the 4 things, it's just another thing that the client likes to do, is it calls to the config a lot because you might have different languages, different locations, which this one is doing. So what it does is it calls the config for the zones that you're using. Once again, another reason I have side by side is if I were to go into the Galaxy job, go into the config Lua, you'll see config zones. Lovely. To not spend half an hour explaining it, but just to give you a brief insight, this is K, this is V. See if you can spot where that calls in here. That should be enough time. I know you need the trained eye, but for KV in pairs, config zones do this. Now, as I said, this is K, this is V. Well, K is that, which is what's in the config zones. This might be overcomplicating it, but in a pair, if there's a zone, which there is, if there's a position or anything after that zone, which is in here, then do something with it. Okay, I will. So after it's found out there's a K and a V, which there is, K, V, if the type is not -1, which neither of them are, and the get distance between coords, which is the native for finding the distance between me and the blip, coords, which is there, it gets your coords and everything. Once it can find the difference between these and the distance in number form, it will output that number here, but what's it comparing it to? Well, it's comparing it to this, because it's in the same bracket, as you can see. So once again, it's calling the config, which, as you'll see, the draw distance is 3. Now, I always do it as 1 is half a body's length of your character, because every character is the same height, right? Unless it's a girl wearing heels or whatever. So 3, well, yeah, I'd say that's about 8 feet, which is about right. If you go back in game, I want it to pop up about here. That looks about 3. So once we know it's doing all that and all of that is true, it'll say then do all of this. So all this is doing is it's drawing a marker, the blip, and it's drawing 3D text on your screen. So if you ever see any 3D text, that is hand coded in to very specific coordinates, as you'll see. And that's basically it. All it's doing is it's getting your job, it's making the blips. If you're near the blips, it will show up. And then great, if you're near the blips and you click E, what's it going to do? Well, I just explained that at the very start. That's basically a job script. You can make it do whatever you want. What I'm going to do is replicate this letter for letter and put it in for the SAS. So the SAS requested a job script where they can change their clothes, sort of like Galaxy, which is why I'm copying it. And they can also do some boss actions. And that's what we're going to do. So I've copied the Galaxy job. I'm going to close all this now. I'm going to call it the SAS job for simplicity. Another thing that doesn't really matter is the name of the file. As long as you know what it's called, you could call it something completely different. Some things it will matter, but that's if they're calling it in the resource Lua or FX manifest called dependencies with an open and a close like that. And if it's calling ES extended, like it is up here. If it's got anything to do with this or an @ symbol or anything, that means it has to be called that name. Otherwise, like a job script, most job scripts, I would say, I would reckon you should take the risk. If this isn't a dependency, you can call it whatever you like, basically. That might not make sense right now, and it probably doesn't have to. Anyway, for the SAS, they're pretty secretive, I would say. So maybe we don't do blips. If there is an option to disable it, I would just do that if it's in like a config or something. But because the way that this script is written is it's all client side. It's telling the client what to do all the time. It's not in the config. So what I'm going to do is just get rid of it. Simple as that. In a client, the name of functions don't matter if they're in 2 separate scripts but called the same thing. The only thing that does matter is your events and callbacks, of course. So I can call it the same function as I have 3 other jobs previous. All I need to change is obviously the things that are themed, which is Galaxy. So I'm going to call it SAS. Now, as I said, I was getting to this because this is what's called Font Awesome. A really cool thing that ESX have done recently, which older versions don't have, is what's called open context. What that does is it shows a little logo, and I'm all about customizability. I love the ability to be able to customize stuff. So what I'm actually going to do, if I were to go on Font Awesome and find something to do with the SAS, I don't know, a gun, I guess. I don't know. I could actually find that. And as you can see, it looks roughly the same. FA solid, FA gun. The annoying thing is when you copy from this website and you paste it in here, because that's what the icon's called, it does this stupid thing. So I've got to get rid of all this, but keep the text. That's going to show a little icon of a gun. Brilliant. That's what the SAS is, right? So once again, do not need to change any of this because this is go back in your cloakroom. It's really important that it stays the same. What I forgot to mention is it does another job callback for if enable player management is enabled, which it should always be if it's a job script for ESX. Your job, once again, we've been through this before. Okay, it's not nil, so what is it? Well, the grade name is boss. Now, what that's calling is actually in what's called an SQL table. If you don't know what SQL is, you're a very lucky person. SQL is a database. Now, most inventories, players, cars, everything is stored in here. That's how it can constantly refresh, update, show new data, etc. Otherwise, if it were to save to nothing, then nothing would work. You'd never have a job, whatever. You get the point. So what it's calling is your job. What it's calling is your job, which is SAS, but it's not looking for that. It already knows you're in the SAS, but what it's looking for is your grade. So if you go over to job grades, you'll see in SAS, they're numbered 0 to 3, and it goes up to the name, which is boss. It's not looking for the label. You can call the label whatever you want. You could call it John. Doesn't matter. What it's looking for is that. As you can see, we have lots of bosses because they all require that name to be in the boss menu. So it knows you're in the SAS. It knows that you're the boss. This doesn't really matter, but you can change it. I'll show you quickly. I know this video is fucking long, but if you were to get rid of underscore name, which means it's not looking for text, if you just had grade like that, now it's going to give you a number because, as you can see, it's just looking for the grade. So if you want anyone above a certain level or number, for example, for some reason, there are 9 ranks in the police, well, 10 if you include 0. So if you want anyone above 7, which is a sergeant, to look at the boss menu, all you do, because this is now outputting a number, because I've got rid of underscore name, I would just do anyone with a grade greater than or equal to, what was it, 6, I think? Well, if that number is bigger than that number, it's going to give you boss actions as well. But we're going to get rid of that because we know that, you know, there's already an SAS boss. So now all we need to do is go through everything and find things that are meant for Galaxy, which aren't meant for SAS, of course. So prime example is here. All of this is fine until you see something called Galaxy. Now, what I could also recommend is you Control F it and just look through anything that's called Galaxy. Anything that is, for example, this is a good one. The job name has to be changed, which I'll do right now. But if you Control F and you go through, once again, there's another one, SAS. Oh, I completely missed it. But as you can see, the boss menu, we do not want to open the Galaxy boss menu. We want to open the SAS boss menu. Sorry about that. This one, because it's a text entry, which means it's going to show up on your screen, it's going to open the Galaxy safe, which you don't want. So I'm going to call that SAS safe. And I would say this one's pretty important as well. I'm not entirely sure, but I don't really care. I just know that it's called Galaxy in a different job script. So I always, just for good measure, change it to SAS anyway. So I'm just going to go through, replace that. Yeah, I'll make that caps just for looks. But yeah, I'm just going through making sure the word Galaxy isn't anywhere. So once again, the config, I want to change that. And I'm not sure if you just noticed, but as you can see, it finds you're in the SAS, and this is about, as it's tabbed in, you'll see some people like to leave little notes, little love notes, which are amazing if you're trying to script something and you don't know what the fuck it's doing. So this is when you enter and exit markers. So it's finding a job, etc. That's how it shows up for you and not for anyone else, as I explained KV. But also what it's doing is it's triggering an event in its own script. Because if you were to go and look for that, selected it, click Control F, find next, it's in the same script. Well, how does that make sense? Well, what it's doing is it's finding what zone you're in. This is the zone. If you're in the marker and not have already entered the marker, which is you've pressed E and you're already in the marker, what are you doing? Well, it's going to trigger the event that you've entered the marker. It's pretty simple. And then what that's going to do is if the zone is SAS actions, it's going to give you a prompt saying the boss menu. But if it's the storage, it's not going to give you the prompt. And I'll show you why. So one thing I just lost myself on was what this current action was doing, because it wasn't called Galaxy, but it's still working in the Galaxy script. Now, what the mistake that I made was not renaming it, because I had no fucking idea what it was doing. But as I can understand, it's in SAS actions, which is in the config SAS actions. So it's trying to do all this stuff. I know it's a blip because it's got positions and stuff. What I didn't understand is why it was working. Well, the current action is groove action. So if you're in the zone, that's what it equals to. But what it's going to find, anything to do with that, it's going to do something else somewhere else. Well, that other thing is actually, if you're going to press E in this thread, which is constant, so it's always looking if you're about to press E or not. If you press E, and if the current action while you've pressed E is near the Groove Actions menu. You've seen this before. It's going to open the Groove Actions menu, and now we're all the way back up at the top. So we've fully gone through this whole script, renamed everything, redone everything, even with that little error. I don't need to rename that because it works. Now that we've gone through absolutely everything, we can now get to the zones. Now, if you want 4 different boss blips all in one location, sure, go for it. I mean, they will show up for different jobs anyway, so I guess you could do that. But what we're going to do is put it in the SAS secret base that they have. It's pretty cool. It's got a shark in it. This is very clearly the boss lounge. But what I've just noticed is the safe is right here. Now, I think maybe they don't want the blip here, because if they press E here, they might risk opening the safe, which kind of makes sense. I'm going to actually just chuck the boss blip here. So what I can do on TX, because it's a lazy man's dream, I remember back when I was developing in 2018, you had to do /chords. It would show at the top of your screen, and then you'd literally do this. You drag it down, and then it would show the numbers, and you have to manually enter every number you see. But luckily, it's 2022. We've grown up a bit, and it's copied the chords for me. So all I'm going to do is copy and paste. What TX also does, which is amazing most of the time, is it takes your heading as well. That's not X, Y, or Z. It's where I'm looking, where I'm headed. So what I'll do, this is X there, that's Y there, Z is there. Simple copy and paste. I actually prefer to control X because then I know that I've done it, if that makes sense. But you have to be pretty sure of yourself to do it. Otherwise you might fuck it up. Okay, so we've got the SAS actions, which is called boss actions. Last thing is SAS storage, which is the prompt for the safe, because storage is safe, as we saw. So what I'm actually going to do is go in here. I'm going to stand as close as I can to it, and then TX, copy coords again. So I've just copied those coordinates, plonk them in here once again. Okay, I've got the X, put it in X. Don't forget your minuses as well. If you can't see a blip, just double check that you've got your minuses and your commas in the right place. A very, very, very common mistake. I've seen Bigsy make it about 100 times. It's really funny. And also, you could spice it up a bit if you want different sizes, colors, all that shit. And types, very simple. So what you're going to do is you're going to type markers into Google. CFXRE are amazing. The people that make FiveM are just incredible. They document everything they do. And if you can't find what you're looking for on CFXRE, or some Russian forum that's 6 years old and you have no idea what it means, you're not going to find it anywhere. So this is every marker that you could possibly display in GTA. They do an incredible job. So what I'm looking for is probably for the boss menu, I like to do the dollar because there isn't a pound. It's very annoying, but that's type 29. So we'll just go and plonk that in there like that. Simple as. Now also in configs, commas matter. In every separation, every new line that you do needs a comma. I mean, even you see here, there's no brackets because it doesn't need it. It's just a number, but it needs the comma. And if you have separate entries, for example, if this just had one entry like that, let's tab that out real quick. That's a tabbing out feature, by the way. So if you do those 2 square brackets and then 2 tabs out, either end of it, it'll tab out only that bit, not the whole thing. If I leave it open like that, you see that turn green? It's just tabbed out the whole thing and this won't load. Just a little note. So if that was by itself and you went, oh yeah, I could do this well easy. I'll just copy that, put that there. Very common mistake number 2. You don't put a comma there. You should always comma your shit. That's the one thing. If your config doesn't load, or if it says, because it's client side, it will show up in your F8 menu. If it says failed to load or pass script or whatever, config.lua, I would say safely 80% of the time, it's because there's not a comma where it needs to be in the config. I mean, I suppose the same could go for a client. I mean, you see that many symbols in one block, it can get quite hard to read. You can zoom in if you like, control, scroll, but yeah, you need pretty decent eyesight for this. Once you have both your coordinates, which I don't because I did it wrong, back in the config, I've got all my coordinates, and just to be safe, because I can, I've put a comma there just because it won't read that comma, but I'll know it's there. And if I ever want to put anything below it, I don't need to copy the comma again. Now that we've got all of our blips where it needs to be, I'm going to crack open Chrome. And if it's a new script you've just made, it won't show up if I do start SAS job. And it also won't show up if I try and search it in the resources. The reason for that is you need to reload and refresh every time you make a new script. So it's executing the command. Okay, now it should have found it. There we go, SAS job, one-time drag strip job. As I said, I've copied 4 jobs from this. Now the way to change that, if you're wondering, to be really anal about it, is up there. Anything you put in description, it will be in your TX admin. So if I write get fucked and I restart, refresh, sorry, right, SAS, it'll say it there. Really good feature, love it. All right, jumping into the live console, I see that it started fine with no errors. Yeah, nothing. And if I go back in FiveM, I see that I can't see any blips. Oh, hold on, let's have a look at my job. Ah, on one time. That's called being an idiot. So I'm going to set myself to SAS 3, was it? There we go. So we've got the safe. I'll open that in a minute. Let me just triple check the boss blip is there. It is. Okay, so because we've done everything correctly, when I press E, it will show the little gun that we put in our cloakroom, where I can change all of my clothes. Very nice, cool. And also the boss actions. So when I click that, it takes me to the different menu. So I can wash money, a bit naughty, but I can also manage all the employees. So it'll show a list. I'm in command, which is boss. I can promote and fire people. This is just a very simple boss menu. But as I clicked escape there, it didn't back me out completely, put me back in here, because that's what we told it to do. Once again, in the cloakroom, we've got go back up there as well. So it's all coded into the client. And you go back again, and it's exited me. Maybe I should rename that to exit, but anyway. And then you've got the safe. So I know it's already open, but oh, that's strange. It says SAS boss menu. You know what? If you go back in the video, you'll probably see where where I went wrong. But anyway, so when you open the safe, you press E. There you go. And you've got an SAS safe. So you can put everything in there. Cool. Got all your stuff. Put the money in there. And yeah, there you go. So you have now made a boss blip and a safe.